When I first matched with Evan on Tinder, he seemed too good to be true. He was the kind of guy that looked like he belonged on a magazine cover, tall, sharp jawline, sandy blonde hair, and the most piercing blue eyes I'd ever seen. His profile wasn't overly detailed, just enough to keep you curious. He worked in finance, loved hiking, and mentioned a passion for photography. No red flags, just a seemingly normal guy looking for a connection. We started chatting, and everything about our conversations was easy. He was charming, witty, and made me laugh. After a few days, we decided to meet in person. He suggested a bar in the downtown area, somewhere classy but not too fancy. It felt perfect until it wasn't. The night of our date, I felt excited, but strangely anxious. Something was off, though I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I brushed it off as typical pre-date jitters and headed to the bar. When I arrived, I saw him immediately. He was standing at the bar, looking even better in person. My stomach did a little flip when he smiled at me. He was everything I expected, and yet, somehow, not. The date started well. We talked about the usual work, hobbies, favorite places to travel. But as the evening went on, I noticed something odd. Every time I tried to steer the conversation towards his past, Evan dodged the questions. When I asked about his family, he gave vague answers. "I don't really talk to them much," he'd say. I didn't want to push, thinking maybe he had a rough family situation, so I let it slide. Then, when I asked where he grew up, he paused, almost as if he was trying to remember. "A small town, up north," he finally said, but something about the way he said it felt rehearsed, like he'd used that line before. It was strange, but I didn't want to overthink it. The rest of the date went smoothly, and he walked me to my car. Before I left, he leaned in close and whispered, "I had a great time tonight. Let's do this again soon." His voice was low, almost too low, like it was meant to send chills down my spine. I smiled, but the unease lingered. Over the next few days, we texted constantly. The conversation was still great, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I decided to do a bit of digging. You know how it goes, searching social media, looking for any clues about his life. But I couldn't find a thing. It was as if he didn't exist online. No Instagram, no Facebook, not even LinkedIn. It was weird for a guy his age to have no digital footprint. My gut told me to be cautious, but I convinced myself I was being paranoid. We went on a few more dates, each one a little more unnerving than the last. It wasn't anything he did outright, but more the things he didn't do. He never talked about his friends, never made plans for the future, and always kept his responses about himself short, as if he was hiding something. Then, there was the way he looked at me like he was studying me, as if every word I said was being filed away in his mind. One night, after another great yet unsettling date, I decided to trust my instincts. I searched his name online, hoping to find any trace of who this guy really was. But the more I searched, the stranger things got. There were no records of an Evan working in finance anywhere in the city. Nothing matched his name. And then, I found something that stopped me cold. A news article from 5 years ago. A man named Evan Foster had gone missing under mysterious circumstances. He had been involved in a high-profile financial scandal, and shortly after, he disappeared. The kicker, the photo in the article, it was him. The same piercing blue eyes, the same sharp jawline. But this couldn't be possible. How could he be missing if I was dating him? I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. I read the article over and over again, hoping I'd made a mistake. But there was no mistaking it. The man I had been seeing, the charming, funny guy who had swept me off my feet, had been declared dead after disappearing without a trace. Panic surged through me. I called my best friend, explaining everything in a rushed, breathless rant. She was as freaked out as I was and told me to stop seeing him immediately. But part of me was still in disbelief. How could the man I'd been with be dead? It didn't make sense. The next day, I received a text from Evan asking me to meet him at his place. My heart raced as I stared at my phone, the words on the screen feeling more like a trap than an invitation. I knew I couldn't go, but I needed answers. So, instead of meeting him, I drove by his apartment later that evening. I parked down the street, watching from a distance. That's when I saw it. It was him. But something was wrong. His face was pale, almost translucent in the dim light. His eyes, once bright and full of life, seemed hollow, dead. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel. I didn't wait to find out more. I floored it, driving away as fast as I could, my mind racing. I never responded to his texts, never went back to that bar. But he didn't stop. For weeks, I kept getting messages from him. Always casual, always pretending like nothing was wrong, as if we had a normal, happy relationship. But every time I saw his name pop up on my phone, that same cold fear washed over me. Eventually, the messages stopped, but the feeling of being watched never did. Sometimes, late at night, I'd see a figure standing across the street from my apartment, just far enough away that I couldn't make out his face. But I knew it was him. It had to be. I don't know who or what Evan really was. Whether he was a ghost, a man living under a false identity, or something far worse. All I know is that after our last date, I was left with a terrifying truth. Some people on Tinder are more than just bad matches, they're not even alive. It was a Thursday night when I matched with Jason. His profile was simple, but his photos were stunning. He was tall, rugged, and had that outdoorsy look that suggested he spent his weekends hiking or camping. His bio mentioned that he loved the wilderness, photography, and getting away from the noise. I didn't think much of it at first. It seemed like a typical Tinder bio, the kind you scroll past without giving it much thought. But his smile, there was something inviting about it. Before I knew it, I had swiped right. Within minutes, we matched, and the conversation flowed easily. Jason was charming, articulate, and a little mysterious, which only made him more appealing. He suggested we meet up that weekend, and instead of the usual dinner or coffee, he had a different idea. A weekend at his cabin in the woods. Now, any sane person would have said no. But there was something about Jason that made me feel like I could trust him. Besides, I needed a break from the city, and a weekend getaway sounded perfect. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Friday came, and I packed my bags. Jason had given me the directions to the cabin, which was about 3 hours outside the city. It wasn't too remote, but remote enough to feel like an escape. As I drove, the landscape changed from bustling highways to quiet, winding roads lined with towering trees. The deeper I went, the more isolated it felt. It was exactly the kind of place you'd go to disconnect from the world. I arrived at the cabin around dusk. It was small but cozy, nestled between thick pine trees, with a small stream running nearby. The air was crisp, and the smell of pine was overwhelming. Jason was already there, standing on the porch with that same charming smile from his profile. He waved as I pulled up, and for a moment, all my doubts disappeared. He seemed harmless, just a guy looking to show me his favorite spot in the world. "Hey, glad you made it," he said, walking over to greet me. "You're gonna love it here." The inside of the cabin was just as charming as the outside. There was a wood-burning stove, a large rug in front of it, and a cozy couch that looked like it had seen better days. Jason had already lit a fire, and the warmth was welcoming after the long drive. He offered me a drink, and we spent the next few hours talking, laughing, and getting to know each other. It all seemed so perfect. As the night wore on, something started to feel off. Jason kept asking me strange questions, like how often I told people where I was going, or if I had any close family in the city. At first, I thought he was just making conversation, but the more he probed, the more uncomfortable I became. "What's with all the questions?" I asked, half joking but trying to mask my unease. Jason smiled, but this time it wasn't the warm, inviting smile I had seen before. There was something predatory about it. "Just curious," he said casually. "You never know who's out there, right? Gotta be careful." I forced a laugh, but inside, alarm bells were going off. I made a mental note to stay cautious, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe it was the isolation getting to me. But as the night went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. We eventually called it a night, and Jason offered me the bedroom while he took the couch. I locked the door behind me and tried to get some sleep, but I couldn't shake the growing sense of dread. Every little sound outside the cabin seemed to amplify: the wind rustling the leaves, the creak of the wooden floorboards, and something else. Something that sounded like footsteps. I sat up in bed, listening intently. The footsteps were soft at first, but they grew louder, more deliberate. Someone was walking outside the cabin, circling it. I held my breath, hoping it was just an animal. But then I heard the unmistakable sound of a hand scraping against the window pane. My heart raced. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't make a sound. The footsteps stopped right outside the bedroom window. I didn't dare move. I stared at the window, waiting for anything to happen. But after what felt like hours, the footsteps retreated, disappearing into the forest. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was overreacting. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, Jason acted like nothing had happened. He was cheerful, making breakfast and talking about taking a hike through the woods. I played along, but I was already planning my escape. I needed to leave, but I didn't want to raise suspicion, so I told him I wasn't feeling well and needed to head back to the city. Jason didn't seem surprised. He just smiled that same eerie smile and nodded. "Sure, I'll walk you to your car." As we walked outside, I couldn't help but glance around. The woods felt different in the daylight, less menacing but still unsettling. As I opened my car door, Jason grabbed my arm, gently but firmly. "Hey, before you go," he said, his voice low and serious. "There's something I need to tell you." My heart pounded in my chest. "What is it?" He leaned in close, his breath hot against my ear. "You're not the first girl I've brought here." I froze, my mind racing. What did he mean by that? Before I could respond, Jason released my arm and stepped back, his expression unreadable. "Drive safe," he said with a smirk. I didn't waste any time. I got in my car and sped down the gravel road, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. As soon as I was out of sight of the cabin, I pulled over and tried to collect myself. My phone had no signal, but I didn't care. I just needed to get as far away from that place as possible. For the next few weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I walked down the street, every time I went to work, I felt like Jason was there, lurking in the shadows. I deleted Tinder, blocked his number, and tried to forget about the whole thing. But then, one day, I received an anonymous message. It was a photo of me, taken through the window of my apartment. And below it, a message, "I'll see you soon." As we left the restaurant, Adam walked me to my car. The parking lot was nearly empty, the only light coming from a single flickering street lamp. I fumbled for my keys, eager to get into my car and drive away. But before I could unlock the door, Adam stepped in front of me, blocking my path. "Are you sure you don't want to go for that walk?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. There was no smile now, only a hard, cold look in his eyes. I swallowed hard, every instinct screaming at me to get out of there. "No, I think I'm just going to head home," I said, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to stay calm. Adam didn't move, he just stood there, staring at me with that unnerving intensity. My heart was racing, and I could feel the panic rising in my chest. "All right," he said finally, stepping aside. "Drive safe." I didn't need to be told twice. I quickly unlocked my car, jumped in, and locked the doors behind me. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Adam standing there, watching me with a look that sent chills down my spine. I drove home in silence, my mind racing. The date had started out so perfectly, but by the end, I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had almost happened. I told myself I was being paranoid, that Adam was just a little intense, but deep down, I knew there was more to it than that. A few days passed, and I didn't hear from Adam. Part of me was relieved, but another part of me was curious. What had happened? Why had he changed so suddenly? I decided to do a little digging, just to see if I could find anything about him online. What I found made my blood run cold. There were news articles, dozens of them, about women who had gone missing after meeting someone on a dating app. The descriptions of the man they had met were eerily similar to Adam. Charming, outdoorsy, with a love for secluded places. But none of the women had ever been found. My heart pounded as I scrolled through the articles, my hands shaking. I had been so close to becoming another one of those women. I immediately blocked Adam on Tinder and deleted the app. I couldn't take any chances. For days, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that Adam was out there, waiting. I double-checked my locks, avoided going out at night, and jumped at every sound. Then, one evening, I received a message on my phone. It was from an unknown number, but the text was clear. "I'll see you soon." I wasn't new to Tinder, having been on and off the app for years without any real success. But when I matched with a guy named Adam, it felt different. His profile was intriguing, with witty captions under pictures of him hiking, traveling, and even volunteering at a local shelter. He seemed like someone who cared about the world, a rare find in the world of swipes and superficial connections. We started talking, and unlike most conversations that fizzle out after a few messages, ours just kept flowing. We discussed everything from our favorite books to our love of nature, and before long, he suggested we meet up. I hesitated for a moment. After all, meeting someone from a dating app always came with a certain amount of risk, but Adam seemed different. His messages were thoughtful, and I found myself eagerly anticipating each new text from him. When he suggested dinner at a quiet, off-the-beaten-path restaurant in a neighboring town, I decided to take the plunge. The day of our date arrived, and I found myself more nervous than I'd expected. There was something thrilling about meeting someone new, especially someone who seemed as genuine as Adam. I dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that was casual but flattering, and made sure my phone was fully charged. Safety first, I told myself. The restaurant Adam had chosen was a small, rustic place on the edge of town. The kind of place that felt homey, with its wooden beams, dim lighting, and a fireplace crackling in the corner. It wasn't the kind of place that you'd find by accident. You had to know it existed to seek it out. When I arrived, Adam was already there, waiting for me by the door with that same easy smile I'd seen in his photos. "Hey, you made it," he said warmly, opening the door for me. "I've been looking forward to this." We were seated at a cozy table near the fireplace, and as we ordered drinks, the conversation picked up right where it had left off in our messages. Adam was just as charming in person as he'd been online. He had a way of making me feel like the only person in the room, his attention completely focused on me. It was intoxicating. As the night wore on, I found myself relaxing more and more. The food was delicious, the wine flowed easily, and Adam was the perfect gentleman. He asked me thoughtful questions, listened intently to my answers, and made me laugh with his witty anecdotes. It was one of the best first dates I'd ever been on. But as we finished our meal, something shifted. Adam's demeanor changed ever so slightly. It was subtle, but I noticed it. His gaze, which had been warm and attentive all evening, grew darker. His smile, once inviting, now seemed to hold something more sinister behind it. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the easygoing atmosphere of the evening had turned cold. "So, what's next?" I asked, trying to keep the mood light. Adam leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing slightly. "How about we take a walk? There's a really nice trail nearby. It's quiet, secluded, perfect for a little privacy." My heart skipped a beat. The idea of being alone in the woods with someone I had just met suddenly didn't seem as appealing as it had earlier in the evening. I tried to think of a polite way to decline without sounding paranoid. "That sounds nice, but it's getting late," I said, forcing a smile. "Maybe another time." Adam's smile faltered, just for a moment, but it was enough to make my stomach twist with unease. He shrugged casually, but there was something cold in his eyes now. "Yeah, sure. No problem," he said, his tone just a little too flat. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but it was short-lived. As the waiter came to clear our plates, I noticed Adam watching me with a strange intensity, as if he were sizing me up, calculating something. I tried to brush it off as my imagination, but the sense of dread I'd felt earlier only grew stronger. When the bill came, Adam insisted on paying, despite my protests. "I've got this," he said with a grin, but the charm had faded, replaced by something darker, something I couldn't quite place. I have always been skeptical of dating apps. There was something unsettling about meeting strangers online. But after a string of uneventful and boring relationships, I decided to give Tinder a shot. It wasn't long before I matched with a guy named Carl. He had this artsy vibe. His profile pictures were all aesthetically taken, the kind you'd expect from someone with a passion for photography. His bio said he was a freelance photographer, and his gallery had beautiful landscapes, portraits, and candid shots of life in the city. His messages were polite, genuine, and even a little shy, which was refreshing in a sea of overly confident matches. After chatting for a few days, he suggested we meet up for a photo walk in a nearby park. At first, the idea sounded a bit strange. I had never heard of a photo walk as a first date, but the concept intrigued me. I told myself that maybe this could be fun, a break from the mundane coffee or dinner dates. Besides, it was in a public park, so it seemed safe. The day of the date was overcast but dry, perfect weather for walking around without overheating. I dressed casually, grabbed my phone, and headed out to the park where we had agreed to meet. I was a little early, so I took a seat on a bench near the entrance, scrolling through my phone to kill time. 10 minutes passed, then 15. I was about to text him when I noticed a figure approaching from the far side of the park. Kyle. He was dressed in jeans and a flannel, with a camera strapped around his neck. His face was just like in his profile pictures, soft features, with slightly disheveled brown hair and glasses perched on his nose. "Hey, sorry I'm late," he said, slightly out of breath, as he jogged the last few steps to where I was sitting. "No problem," I replied, smiling. "Glad you made it." Carl wasted no time getting started, immediately suggesting we take a walk around the park while he snapped some pictures. As we strolled along the winding paths, he would stop every few minutes to photograph a flower, a tree, or the ducks in the pond. Occasionally, he'd lift his camera to capture candid shots of me, explaining that he loved capturing people in their natural moments. At first, I found it charming. His passion for photography was contagious, and I was enjoying watching him work. He had a way of seeing beauty in the smallest details, things I wouldn't have noticed if it weren't for his camera. But as the afternoon wore on, I began to feel a little uneasy. Carl had taken dozens of photos of me, far more than I was comfortable with. It wasn't just a casual snap here and there anymore. He was actively directing me, asking me to stand in certain places, to turn my head just so, to smile or not smile. I felt like I was being photographed for a professional shoot, not just a casual first date. "Let's take one over there, by the old fountain," he suggested, pointing toward a section of the park that was mostly abandoned. The trees there were thicker, casting deep shadows over the cobbled path. I hesitated. "That's pretty far from the main area. Maybe we should stick closer to the entrance." He laughed lightly, though there was something off about it. "Come on, it'll only take a minute. The lighting is perfect over there." Against my better judgment, I followed him. The deeper we walked into the park, the more isolated it felt. The birdsong that had filled the air earlier was now eerily absent. Even the usual park-goers seemed to have disappeared. Kyle was ahead of me, already snapping photos of the fountain before I could catch up. When I finally reached him, he asked me to stand by the fountain and pose. I forced a smile, trying to push aside my discomfort. He snapped several pictures, moving around me in a slow circle, his camera clicking constantly. His eyes never left the lens, focused intently on me in a way that made me feel exposed, like I was some kind of specimen under observation. "Okay, I think that's enough," I said, my voice tight. I was ready to leave, the fun of the afternoon long gone. Just one more, he said, but his voice had changed. It was softer, almost hypnotic. Look over your shoulder. Like you're surprised. I did as he asked, but as I turned, something caught my eye, his backpack, lying open on the ground next to him. Inside, I could see an unsettling array of items, rolls of film, several notebooks, a few disposable cameras, and a folder with printed photographs. Before I could stop myself, I knelt down and pulled one of the photos from the folder. My stomach dropped. It was me, not just a photo from today, but photos from before we even met. There I was, walking down the street, sitting at a cafe, shopping for groceries, all taken without my knowledge. My hands shook as I flipped through more of the pictures, each one more invasive than the last. Carl, I whispered, standing up, holding the photos in front of me. What is this? He didn't respond right away. He simply smiled, but it wasn't the shy, sweet smile from his profile. It was something much darker, something dangerous. I've been watching you for a while, he said, his voice low, calm. You're perfect, the way you move, the way you smile. I had to capture it. I had to make sure I got it right. My heart was racing, my mouth dry. This was beyond creepy, this was psychotic. I think I'm going to go, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I backed away, but Carl stepped forward, his camera still in hand, like he was preparing for another shot. You can't leave yet, he said, his tone almost pleading. We haven't finished. I turned and bolted, running as fast as I could back toward the main part of the park. I didn't look back, but I could hear him calling my name, his footsteps pounding behind me. I sprinted past the pond, past the benches, past the picnic tables where people had once been. The park felt abandoned now, empty. Finally, I reached the entrance and dashed across the street, ducking into a crowded cafe. I stood there, gasping for breath, looking back through the window. Kyle was nowhere to be seen, but I didn't feel safe. I wouldn't feel safe until I was far away from that park, from him. That night, I blocked Kyle on Tinder and deleted the app altogether. I thought about going to the police, but what would I say? That a guy took pictures of me without my permission. It felt like such a weak accusation, considering what had happened. But I knew deep down that what Carl had done was more than just an invasion of privacy. Weeks passed, and I started to move on from the whole experience. But then, one morning, I found something on my doorstep. A package wrapped in brown paper, with no return address. My hands shook as I tore it open, revealing a thick stack of photographs. They were all of me. Some were from the park, taken during our date. Others were from before, from the times I had seen in his folder. And then there were new ones, photos of me in my home, taken through the window, while I was asleep, while I was unaware. I called the police, but they couldn't trace the sender. Carl had vanished without a trace. But I knew deep down that he was still out there, watching, waiting for his perfect shot. The sound of my phone vibrating against the wooden table broke the silence of my quiet apartment. I glanced at the screen, half expecting another mundane Tinder match. Instead, it was a message from a guy named Lucas. His profile showcased a handsome smile and adventurous lifestyle. Intrigued, I opened the chat. Hey, how's it going? Up for a midnight adventure? It was past midnight. and I hesitated for a moment. Midnight adventures, my curiosity piqued. I had been feeling restless lately, and the idea of doing something spontaneous was appealing. After a brief back and forth, I agreed to meet at a nearby diner, which was open 24 hours. Lucas arrived shortly after I did, a tall guy with tousled dark hair and a charming smile. He wore a leather jacket that added to his rugged look. We exchanged pleasantries and quickly fell into conversation, discussing our interests, travel, and favorite places to explore. I found myself laughing more than I had in weeks. After a couple of cups of coffee and a slice of pie, Lucas leaned in, his eyes sparkling. "You want to see something cool? What do you have in mind?" I asked, intrigued. "Ever been to the old abandoned factory on the edge of town?" I raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "Isn't that place supposed to be haunted?" Lucas shrugged, his smile unwavering. "That's what they say, but I think it's just a bunch of stories. Besides, it'll be fun, just the two of us." I felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. Part of me wanted to say no, but the adventurous side overruled my hesitation. "Okay, let's do it." We hopped into his car, the night air cool and crisp. The drive felt exhilarating as we left the familiar city streets behind and ventured into the darkened outskirts. Lucas played upbeat music, and I felt the thrill of spontaneity wash over me. When we arrived at the factory, I was taken aback by its size. The building loomed before us, its shattered windows and rusted metal giving it a ghostly appearance under the moonlight. Lucas parked the car, and we stepped out, the sound of gravel crunching underfoot echoing in the stillness. "This place has been abandoned for years," he said, his voice echoing slightly. "But it's got a lot of character." As we approached the entrance, I felt a chill run down my spine. The atmosphere shifted, the air thick with anticipation. Lucas pushed open the creaky door, and we stepped inside. The interior was dark, the only light coming from the moon filtering through broken windows. "Wow," I whispered, taking in the scene. The remnants of old machinery lay scattered, the walls adorned with peeling paint and graffiti. It was both fascinating and eerie. Lucas pulled out his phone and started snapping pictures. "This place is perfect for a little exploration," he said, grinning. Lucas seemed in his element, pointing out various features and sharing random facts about the building's history. I couldn't help but feel a little uneasy, the silence wrapping around us like a shroud. "Let's check out the upper levels," Lucas suggested, motioning toward a staircase at the far end of the room. "Are you sure it's safe?" I asked, hesitating. He chuckled. "Live a little, come on." Reluctantly, I followed him up the stairs. The creaking wood beneath our feet added to the atmosphere. As we reached the second floor, I felt a sense of unease creep in. The air was colder here, and shadows seemed to dance in the corners of my vision. "Isn't this amazing?" Lucas exclaimed, turning his phone camera toward the dimly lit space. "Yeah, but it's a bit creepy, don't you think?" I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. He laughed again, a carefree sound that seemed to cut through the tension. "That's the fun of it. Just imagine the stories this place holds." We explored the floor, and I tried to shake off the growing anxiety. But as we ventured deeper, something felt off. The atmosphere thickened, and I couldn't shake the sensation that we weren't alone. "Let's go check out the roof," Lucas suggested, his excitement palpable. I hesitated. "I don't know. What if we get stuck up there?" "Don't worry, it'll be worth it." With a mix of trepidation and curiosity, I agreed, and we made our way to another staircase leading to the rooftop. The climb felt endless, and by the time we reached the top, my heart raced not just from the exertion, but from the creeping dread that had settled in the back of my mind. The roof offered a breathtaking view of the night sky, stars twinkling above, but the beauty was overshadowed by an unsettling feeling. Lucas leaned against the edge, snapping pictures of the cityscape, while I stood a few steps back, feeling the chill of the wind against my skin. "Isn't this incredible?" he shouted over the wind. "Yeah, it is," I replied, though I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Suddenly, a noise echoed from below, a loud clatter that made my heart jump. I glanced at Lucas, who seemed unfazed, still engrossed in taking pictures. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Lucas shrugged, still focused on his phone. "Probably just some trash blowing around." "It happens," but I couldn't shake the unease. I walked to the edge of the roof and peered down. The dark void below felt menacing. "I think we should head back down," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Just a few more minutes," Lucas urged. "I want to get some more shots." Before I could protest, I heard another noise, louder this time, a distinct shuffling sound coming from the floor below us. My heart raced, and I stepped back from the edge. "Okay, I'm serious." "We should go," I insisted, glancing around anxiously. Lucas finally looked up, his expression shifting as he sensed my discomfort. "Fine, let's head down." We made our way back to the staircase, but as we descended, the sounds grew louder, footsteps echoing beneath us, a slow, deliberate thud. I felt a chill run down my spine. "Lucas, do you hear that?" I whispered, my voice trembling. He nodded, his face paling slightly. "Yeah, let's hurry." We rushed down the stairs, my pulse racing. The air felt charged with tension, and every creak of the floorboards sent shivers down my spine. As we reached the ground floor, the noise stopped. We stepped into the main room, scanning the dark corners for any sign of movement. "Maybe it was just an animal," I suggested, trying to convince myself. "Maybe," Lucas replied, though he didn't sound convinced. Just then, a shadow darted across the room, and I froze. "What was that?" I gasped, gripping Lucas's arm. "Let's get out of here," he said urgently, his eyes wide. We bolted toward the exit, adrenaline fueling our every step. As we reached the door, a loud crash resonated behind us. We glanced back, and my blood ran cold. A figure stood at the far end of the room, barely visible in the dim light. It was tall and grotesque, a silhouette with unnatural angles. I couldn't make out any features, but I could feel its gaze locked onto us, an unsettling presence that sent a wave of terror through my body. "Go, go, go," Lucas shouted, yanking the door open. We sprinted into the cool night air, not stopping until we were safely inside the car. Lucas fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking as he struggled to start the engine. "Come on," I urged, glancing back at the factory. The figure was no longer visible, but the feeling of being watched remained. Finally, the car roared to life, and Lucas peeled out of the parking lot, the tires screeching against the asphalt. I turned to look back one last time, my heart pounding in my chest. "What the hell was that?" I asked, my voice shaky. Lucas was silent for a moment, his expression serious. "I don't know, but we need to get out of here." We drove in silence, the tension in the air thick. The thrill of the adventure had turned into sheer terror. As we reached the main road, Lucas finally spoke. "I'm sorry about that. I didn't think it would be so." Intense, I shook my head, still reeling from the experience. Intense doesn't even begin to cover it. What was that thing? Lucas sighed, running a hand through his hair. I've heard stories about this place. People say it's haunted by something. Something that doesn't like intruders. I shivered at his words, the reality of our encounter sinking in. You knew about this, not in detail. I just thought it would be fun to explore. You know, I didn't respond, my mind racing. This wasn't just a simple date anymore. It had morphed into something far more sinister. As we drove through the darkened streets, I could still feel the weight of the factory's shadows lingering in my mind. I needed to get home, to escape the unease that had settled in my gut. When we finally reached my apartment, I couldn't get out of the car fast enough. Thanks for the adventure, Lucas, but I think I need some time to process everything. He nodded, his expression serious. I get it. Just be careful. I stepped out and closed the door behind me, watching as he drove away. The street was quiet, the night air still, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Inside my apartment, I locked the door and leaned against it, trying to catch my breath. My heart raced as I replayed the night in my mind. What had we stumbled upon? Just as I thought I could finally relax, my phone buzzed again, shattering the silence. I picked it up, and my blood ran cold. It was a message from Lucas. Did you make it home okay? Just wanted to let you know. I forgot to mention the figure you saw tonight. I think it might be watching you now. I felt my breath hitch in my throat as I stared at the screen, my heart racing again. What do you mean? I typed back, anxiety surging through me. He didn't respond. Minutes passed, and the silence felt oppressive. I tried to convince myself it was just a prank, but the words lingered, clawing at my mind. I moved to the window, peering outside into the darkness. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Suddenly, my phone buzzed again. Just don't look outside, Lucas texted. Panic coursed through me. I stumbled back from the window, my heart racing. Why not? The response was immediate. Because it's already too late.